The Catcher in the Rye is one of the most influential American novels published in the mid-20th century. Upon its publication in 1951, J.D. Salinger's only full-length novel became something of a cult, helping to inspire the Beat generation and powerfully capturing a moment in American cultural history. The novel follows Holden Caulfield for 3 days after he is expelled from school. Holden recounts his story from an institution in California and, throughout the book, readers see him navigate through his teenage angst and alienation with his environment. The novel is narrated by 16-year-old Holden Caulfield, who has been expelled from his elite school, Pensy Prep, for not doing any work. He visits his history teacher, Mr. Spencer, at his home where the teacher is unwell. However, Mr. Spencer annoys Holden when he wants to go through the body's mistakes so he can learn why he has failed. Holden then goes back to his dorm room, where another student, Ackley, and Holden's roommate Stradlater turn up. Holden learns that Stradlater has a date with the girl he had fallen in love with the previous year, but agrees to write an English composition for his roommate so Stradlater has his evening free to go on the date. However, later that evening when Stradlater returns from his date, Holden grows jealous, and the two of them fight, with Holden losing. Although he is supposed to remain at the boarding school until the end of term, Holden decides to take off immediately, traveling to New York on the train with the mother of one of his classmates. He entertains her, and himself, by making up outlandish stories about how popular her son is at school. Then he checks into a hotel in New York, because he wants to avoid going home and telling his parents he has been expelled. He visits a nightclub and, back at his hotel room, arranges for a prostitute named Sunny to come to his room. But when the virginal Holden reveals he just wants to talk to her, she leaves, returning with her pimp, who demands more money from him before attacking him, while Sunny takes money out of Holden's wallet. To cheer himself up the next day, Holden phones a girl he knows named Sally Hayes, and, even though he considers her a phony, they arrange to see a play at the theater. It is while he is on his way to meet Sally, while purchasing a record for his sister Phoebe, that Holden hears a boy singing "If a Body Catches a Body" coming through the rye. After the play, Holden and Sally go ice skating, but Holden scares Sally away by suggesting they go and live in the woods. Next, Holden meets Carl Luce, an old school friend, for a drink in a bar. Once again, Holden ends up annoying someone, this time by taking an unusual level of interest in Carl's love life. Holden gets drunk and goes to Central Park, before going home to see Phoebe, avoiding alerting his parents to the fact he has returned. Phoebe works out that Holden is home because he's been expelled from school, and Holden tells Phoebe his dream of being the Catcher in the Rye. Holden escapes the family home when his parents arrive back at the house, and goes to visit another former teacher of his, Mr. Antolini, who taught him English. Antolini is worried about Holden and, like Mr. Spencer, wants Holden to focus and make something of himself. He does, however, let Holden stay the night, though things take a dark turn when Holden wakes up to discover Mr. Antolini patting his head and interprets this as an inappropriate advance. He leaves, passing the rest of the night at Grand Central Station. The next day, he decides to leave society and go and live in seclusion in a log cabin. When Phoebe hears of his plan, she wants to go with him, but Holden refuses to let her. He takes her to the zoo and buys her a ride on the carousel to make it up to her, and the two share a happy moment. The novel ends with Holden confiding to us that he has met with his parents and agreed to start at a new school in September. The brief holiday, the youthful rebellion, is over. The Catcher in the Rye is a Bildungsroman, a novel about a young character's growth into maturity. While it is appropriate to discuss the novel in such terms, Holden Caulfield is an unusual protagonist for a Bildungsroman because his central goal is to resist the process of maturity itself. As his thoughts about the Museum of Natural History demonstrate, Holden fears change and is overwhelmed by complexity. He wants everything to be easily understandable and eternally fixed, like the statues of Eskimos and Indians in the museum. He is frightened because he is guilty of the sins he criticizes in others, and because he can't understand everything around him. But he refuses to acknowledge this fear, expressing it only in a few instances, for example, when he talks about sex and admits that sex is something I just don't understand. I swear to God I don't. Instead of acknowledging that adulthood scares and mystifies him, Holden invents a fantasy that adulthood is a world of superficiality and hypocrisy, phoniness, while childhood is a world of innocence, curiosity, and honesty. Nothing reveals his image of these two worlds better than his fantasy about the catcher in the rye. He imagines childhood as an idyllic field of rye in which children romp and play. Adulthood, for the children of this world, is equivalent to death, a fatal fall over the edge of a cliff. His created understandings of childhood and adulthood allow Holden to cut himself off from the world by covering himself with a protective armor of cynicism. But as the book progresses, Holden's experiences, particularly his encounters with Mr. Antolini and Phoebe, reveal the shallowness of his conceptions. Holden feels alienated from everything in society, and it is a major theme of Catcher in the Rye. He doesn't want to grow up, and rather than face the realities of the world, chooses to alienate himself from complicated situations. He uses alienation as a way of standing apart and feeling special, which allows him to develop a distorted worldview, one where everyone else is at fault, but he ends up with the most negative repercussions. Holden struggles with the desire to belong, but like many people, he finds it tough to come across someone that he can connect with. He sees adults as phony and fake and doesn't respect them and feels disconnected from most of them. His classmates at Pensy Prep don't like him and he doesn't get along with them, making him feel lonely. Despite his best efforts and intentions, women don't seem to be attracted to him. He views society as fake and feels disconnected from it as well. Even when he tries to make conversations with taxi drivers, they seem disinterested in conversing with him. Holden tries to make connections and feel less alienated, but even those efforts don't work. He feels alienated from everything around him, and this contributes to his deteriorating condition. Phoniness, which is probably the most famous phrase from The Catcher in the Rye, is one of Holden's favorite concepts. It is his catch-all for describing the superficiality, hypocrisy, pretension, and shallowness that he encounters in the world around him. In Chapter 22, just before he reveals his fantasy of the catcher in the rye, Holden explains that adults are inevitably phonies, and, what's worse, they can't see their own phoniness. Phoniness, for Holden, stands as an emblem of everything that's wrong in the world around him and provides an excuse for him to withdraw into his cynical isolation. Though oversimplified, Holden's observations are not entirely inaccurate. Holden can be a highly insightful narrator, and he is very aware of superficial behavior in those around him. Throughout the novel he encounters many characters who do seem affected, pretentious, or superficial: Sally Hayes, Carl Luce, Maurice and Sonny, and even Mr. Spencer stand out as examples. Some characters, like Maurice and Sonny, are genuinely harmful. However, although Holden expends so much energy searching for phoniness in others, he never directly observes his own phoniness. His deceptions are generally pointless and cruel, and he notes that he is a compulsive liar. For example, on the train to New York, Holden perpetrates a mean-spirited and needless prank on Mrs. Morrow. He'd like us to believe that he is a paragon of virtue in a world of phoniness, but that simply isn't the case. Although he'd like to believe that the world is a simple place, and that virtue and innocence rest on one side of the fence while superficiality and phoniness rest on the other, Holden is his own counter-evidence. The world is not as simple as he'd like, and needs, it to be. Even he cannot adhere to the same black and white standards with which he judges other people. Death is the thread that runs through the story. For Holden, death is abstract. He's not primarily afraid of the physical facts of the end of life, because at 16 he can't truly understand it. What Holden fears about death is the change that it brings. Holden continuously wishes for things to remain unchanged, and to be able to go back to better times, a time when Allie was alive. For Holden, Allie's death was a shocking, unwanted change in his life, and he is terrified of more change, more death, especially when it comes to Phoebe. The Catcher in the Rye puts its reader right in the head of a wayward 16-year-old boy struggling with the process of growing up. It accurately reflects the time period in which it was written. The novel published in 1951 paints a picture of affluent New York City life in the post-World War II era.